Now, in this week's Let's Talk Some Star Wars video, we're going to be looking at the results of the poll and your comments on it that ask the question, what was the best lightsaber battle in the prequels? And yeah, if you watched last week's video, you know I originally was just going to do a poll asking what's the best lightsaber battle in all of Star Wars, and we will get to that soon enough. But I couldn't decide what 5 should even make the poll, despite all of you who weighed in on that very topic in the comments last week. So I decided to break it up into smaller pieces before having a grand finale, if you will. Anyway, I'll talk more about that plan in just a moment, but for now let's take a look at the results of the poll, and actually this wasn't as close as I thought it would be. In fact, I thought it might be neck and neck between Duel of the Fates from Episode 1 and Battle of the Heroes, or Obi-Wan vs. Anakin, in Episode 3. But Battle of the Heroes took this by nearly a 2-to-1 margin, capturing 61% of the vote, while Duel of the Fates only got 31%, while the other 3 options really didn't factor in all that much. And yes, many people in the comments pointed out that had I included them, and do keep in mind I'm limited to just 5 choices for these polls, that they would have voted for either Palpatine vs. Windu or Obi-Wan vs. Grievous from Episode 3, which really highlights the fact that there were a lot of lightsaber battles in Revenge of the Sith, considering 3 of the choices were already from that movie, and 2 more could have made the list. Nevertheless, had those 2 been included, I'm not sure either one would have shaken up the results all that much. Not saying they weren't great in their own respect, but I think we all know what 2 would be the most popular out of all these choices, as Joshua Risto pointed out. Anyway, let's now get to the top-rated comment that came to us from Briley Shakespeare, who said, "In my opinion, Anakin vs. Obi-Wan is not only the best lightsaber duel in the prequels, but the best lightsaber duel in the entire franchise so far." And, considering this was the top comment, I'd say that bodes well for it, maybe winning the eventual final showdown. And speaking of that, the game plan right now is to do a poll for each of the major sources of canon, those being the prequels obviously, the original trilogy, the sequels, Rebels, and Clone Wars, just to see what people consider the best from each one, before pitting them against each other in one final poll. And no, I don't think I'll make a Let's Talk Some Star Wars video for each of these sources. Instead, I'll probably put 2 polls up each week for the next 2 weeks, and make a video at the end of each week. And if you're watching this now, there should already be a new poll up. Anyway, let's get back to the comments, starting with one from Kak Pikachu, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that somewhat correctly. And they said, "I'll admit that Anakin vs. Obi-Wan had a lot more emotional weight to it, and I think that Anakin vs. Obi-Wan handled that aspect well. However, looking only at the duels themselves, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon vs. Maul was better choreographed and more entertaining." And yeah, I'd have to mostly agree with that. When taken out of context and judged just on the duel itself, on the visuals, choreography, and so on, instead of any type of meaning or emotion behind it, it's hard to top Duel of the Fates. From the moment that door cracks open, and we see Darth Maul standing there, and the music kicks in and Qui-Gon says, "We'll handle this," to the moment Obi-Wan wins without having the high ground, it's probably the greatest spectacle in all of Star Wars, and I think Onyx the Wolf sums up why in their comment here. "You cannot top Duel of the Fates. Everything about that fight just clicked and was tense all the way through, because apart from Obi-Wan having to survive, you have no idea how these other 2 characters involved will end up or what their lasting impact on the universe will be. Like I said, it just clicked. The music, the pacing, the tension, the choreography. It is by far and away the most memorable fight in all of Star Wars, topping even both instances of Vader vs. Luke." And yes, there is certainly a lot to love about Duel of the Fates, and I remember being in absolute awe the first time I saw it, even though I did have a pretty good idea how it was going to end, or at least that Qui-Gon was going to die, thanks to a track on the CD soundtrack called Qui-Gon's Noble End. And, of course, back then, the soundtrack came out a few weeks before the movie, as did the novelization, though I personally didn't read it ahead of time, but I was tempted to. Really goes to show how much things have changed in the nearly 20 years since The Phantom Menace came out, because they'd never released either of those 2 things early nowadays. Anyway, Duel of the Fates is fantastic. It doesn't have the emotional meaning behind it going into the fight that other lightsaber battles have had, but the repercussions of that fight were monumental in so many ways, hence the name Duel of the Fates. Instead of Qui-Gon training Anakin, Obi-Wan would, and who knows how things turn out if Anakin had been instructed by Qui-Gon instead. Even things like Count Dooku going to the dark side likely change. Not to mention, this was also the beginning of perhaps the best rivalry in all of Star Wars, that being between Maul and Obi-Wan. Then you have one of my favorite moments in all of Star Wars, which Zonix brings up in their comment about when the door beams separate our 3 combatants, and we get to see a fully trained Jedi meditate, a Padawan eager for a fight, and a Sith oozing with hatred for the Jedi. It's an absolutely brilliant 5 seconds of film that really explains that old saying about how showing rather than telling can sometimes say or convey so much more. In fact, Duel of the Fates does so much right that I'm rather surprised at how badly it got crushed by Anakin vs. Obi-Wan in this poll, because I thought there was a good chance it might actually win. Then again, there's what Joshua Hicks said in his comment. For me, this was more than a duel between two skilled lightsaber men. This was the culmination and the shattering of the brotherhood they had built up over many years. All the back-to-back fighting, all the joking and banter, all the trauma they went through together is now falling apart, coming down and crashing around their heads with every swing of their lightsaber. Truly heartbreaking. And especially if you've seen the Clone Wars animated series, where you truly get to see Anakin and Obi-Wan acting like brothers, this fight is indeed heartbreaking, and one of the aspects I love about it is the reluctance on Obi-Wan's part, despite knowing he must do this. He must kill his brother, while Anakin just looks hellbent on killing Obi-Wan the whole time. And I know Hayden Christensen takes a lot of flack for his acting in the prequels, and in his defense, he didn't always have the best lines to work with. But, as I've said many times before, his most impressive moments on screen were always when he was saying nothing at all, and gets to let his expressions do all the talking for him. There are a few moments in this duel where the intense, hate-filled look on Anakin's face is so chilling that you truly do buy that this guy is becoming Darth Vader before our very eyes. However, as Tristan Robertson and many others pointed out, Obi vs. Anakin drags on way too long and is way too flashy. And yes, it is a bit on the long side. I don't think anyone would really argue against that. And there are moments in this fight where they take it a bit too far or just go way over the top, and honestly, they didn't really need to do all that. I personally would have preferred if it was a bit shorter and really just focused more on Anakin being absolutely relentless as he's fueled by all this rage. Yes, the fight was certainly very brutal as is, but I think it could have been even better if certain parts of it, like swinging around flailing lightsabers at each other for example, was removed to focus more on Anakin's rage towards Obi-Wan, that he was something akin to a Terminator at this point, and he would not stop till his target was dead. Then of course there's the ending of the duel, which the sneakiest slop brings up towards the end of their comment, and says that the dialogue towards the end of the Anakin vs. Obi-Wan duel in episode 3 kind of breaks character at a few points. And I do basically agree here. A lot of the dialogue towards the end does feel a bit clunky and unnecessary. In fact, once the duel had begun, I don't know that they needed any talking between them at all till it was over, till after Obi-Wan had cut him up and was telling him about how he was his brother and that he loved him and so on. We didn't really need Obi-Wan apologizing and saying he'd failed. I think we could safely assume that. Nor did we need Anakin telling us that, from his point of view, the Jedi are evil, because clearly he'd bought into Palpatine's lies, mostly because he wanted to justify his own actions, and thought, yeah, that the Jedi were the bad guys now. I think that whole scene works better if all Anakin does is just glare at Obi-Wan, and at most, Obi-Wan briefly tries to reason with him, but Anakin just stares back blankly and maybe says his line about, "This is the end for you, my master," or something like it. Then of course there's the way the duel actually ended, and the famous high ground line, which has led to some of the greatest memes in history at least. And I've always felt like this was simply Obi-Wan's way of trying to bait Anakin into doing something stupid to finally end their fight. Because Anakin really didn't need to try to jump over him. There were certainly other options at that point. But Obi-Wan, his old master, questioning his power and ability triggered Anakin into doing something stupid. And when looked at this way, it shows that the master knew his student's greatest weakness, and he used it to win because he wasn't powerful enough to beat him outright. Okay, let's briefly move on to some comments supporting some of the other duels, and there were several people who said that they were surprised Yoda vs. Sidious didn't get more love, because it only got 5% of the total vote, and Bahamut Zero brings up good points why it maybe should have gotten a bit more love. Objectively, it is Anakin vs. Obi-Wan, but in my opinion, Yoda vs. Palpatine is the best duel in the prequel era. Not only do we see the two most powerful members of their respective orders, but the setting is symbolic. Yoda vs. Palpatine fighting in the heart of the Republic shows the clash of two ideologies, fighting for the fate of the galaxy, but also showing the fall of the Republic that is shown when Palpatine throws the whole Senate at Yoda. Sorry for the robot chicken mention. And I absolutely agree that the symbolism in this fight is incredible. It's also pretty awesome visually. I only wish, and this is a very minor gripe at best, and something that would have been difficult to pull off in the movies, Anyway, I wish there had been some type of personal relationship shown forming between these two, that because of the Clone Wars they were forced to work together, and maybe didn't always see eye to eye, and Yoda became increasingly distrustful of him. Something along those lines, anyway. Anything to give a little bit of a personal story to these two. Next, let's get to a comment from Dark Flames 1978, who said, I feel Anakin vs. Dooku was the best lightsaber battle in the prequels. Not because of anything flashy or over the top, but in my opinion, it was the best with reflecting just how powerful Anakin had become, especially where he was emotionally after he executed him. This is also very true, and is another great example of how showing can be much more powerful than just telling, even though Anakin couldn't resist telling us his power had doubled since last they met. But the fact that Anakin at the end of episode 2 got handled and looked pretty silly against Dooku, and now he pretty easily bests him at the start of episode 3, again tells us, or shows us, everything we need to know about how powerful he has become. Because keep in mind, even Yoda couldn't beat Dooku, and even though I think most of us would have loved to have seen Dooku, played by the late great Christopher Lee, get a bit more screen time and a bigger role in these movies, he served his purpose of being the measuring stick for Anakin quite well. Let's now move on to a comment from Slav Lord, who said, the fight between Mace Windu and Palpatine is the best because Palpatine was the Sith Lord, but Mace Windu was able to disarm and defeat him rather quickly. Some of the greatest Jedi struggled and lost to his apprentice Dooku in episode 2. In episode 3, Yoda struggled against Palpatine. Although he also was able to best him in their lightsaber duel, he had to retreat from their Force duel. We all know that Mace would have been able to finish the duel that he won if it weren't for stupid Anakin getting involved. Anakin vs. Obi-Wan is the second best duel. And I really wish I would have had room to include this one on the poll to see how it would have done, because I do enjoy this duel, even though it's on the shorter side, and there's a lot of clever editing because you're dealing with two somewhat older actors. And I love that it shows just how powerful Windu is, and that, seemingly at least, he had defeated Palpatine, though a debate can certainly be had if that was just part of the plan, to lose intentionally and to force Anakin to make a choice. Either way, it is great and it deserves recognition, but I don't think it would have contended with our top 2 or beaten our winner. Because, as Noah Zabindin brings up in his comment, Anakin vs. Obi-Wan is truly the moment that binds the whole story of Star Wars together. It's the last piece of the puzzle. We see what led Vader to being put into the suit, why he has such hatred for his old master. We see how Obi-Wan got Anakin's saber to pass down to Luke, and we begin to understand why he kept the truth from him. And for all of these reasons and more, a majority of people feel it's the best battle in the prequels, and only time will tell if it's regarded as the best in all of Star Wars. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me if you agree or disagree with the results of this poll and why. So leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.